I thought this was interesting from Anthony. He says, a lot of the comments I'm seeing online are saying that Apple should use this ruling as an excuse to create their own search engine, ignoring all the costs and high level of work needed for them to pull this off. My question is, isn't this solution also anti-competitive? Apple has received criticism for prominently featuring Apple Music, Apple Pay, iMessage, etc. on their devices. So imagine if, in the face of all that, they went off and made their own search engine and made it the default on iOS. I'd love to hear your thoughts. To my non-legal, non-analyst mind, this proposed solution sounds like textbook anti-competitive behavior.
No,
Ben,
this is why. This is like
I knew this would freak you out.
This is why. No, this is why I have been so consistent arguing that legislating against companies innovating is as an anti-competitive solution is insane. Like the only entity truly that can compete with Google here, setting aside Microsoft is probably the one, but is Apple. Apple making their own search engine. If you care about the Google, having competition for Google, this is the answer. And the idea that antitrust regulators are simultaneously trying to argue that companies can't innovate and they can't have their own stuff and they can't have defaults, and you're the European Union, they have a rule that if you make a new service, you can't use data from your other services. What this whole argument against integration is fundamentally opposed to actual pro-competitive outcomes. It's nuts. This is why I keep going off about it. Like my position in this case is 100% consistent with my critique of all these other regulators and all the folks on the antitrust side who get mad and say, "Oh, because you're a pro company sort of what's the word for it? Like shill because you're arguing against these laws." And I'm saying, no, that's not true. You don't know what you're doing. You're arguing and pushing for anti-competitive outcomes in the name of competition. You're dumb. And Anthony put his finger on it. So, Anthony, I don't blame you. I blame the folks that you're reading too many anti-competitive folks who have no idea what they're doing. The answer absolutely is for Apple to be able to do their own stuff. Now, does that mean it's unlimited? Should Apple be able to price Apple Music? This is the important
distinction. Yes, no. Apple can have its own stuff, but there are things Apple does with its own stuff that can then be anti-competitive.
I'd like to think I've been consistent on this point. I am pro. If you built the device, you get to set the defaults. That's your privilege as sort of winning. Now, the Apple Music one is the one to me is clearly a problem because in this case, yeah, Apple Music can be the default. It's on your phone when you buy it. I have no problem with that. My main issue is they have a fundamental pricing advantage relative to Spotify because they don't have to pay the App Store tax and Spotify does, or Spotify has to hope you can go to the web. To me, that is clearly leveraging dominance in one space into a new market. I draw the distinction between that and being a default. To me, default is the reward for innovation. You get to set the defaults. And I think that's the consistent line that I would draw here. But Anthony, you have your finger on it. There is a fundamental inconsistency and incompatibility with most antitrust advocates about this point.
Right. Well, and isn't the problem that anti-competitive is conflated with the concerns that too much corporate concentration is problematic over the long term?
Yeah, the reality is that big companies are big for real fundamental digital. This is the aggregation theory. Like the way digital markets work, is going to tend towards competition, and you're not going to undo that. And to the extent you undo that, you are, this is sort of the privacy, the old sort of bugaboo I think of lots of antitrust advocates is they're like, we need more competition to enhance consumer privacy. It's like, no, it's not going to work that way. You have, number one, you have more regulation, you're locking incumbents. But number two, to the extent you're successful, is you're scattering data in more places, and you're going to have sort of less protection of it. It has been massively pro-privacy to have Meta basically come to dominate display advertising because you're not spreading it around willy-nilly. It's all sort of held in one place. So, this is just gets at my overall critique and my discomfort of coming to realize at a real fundamental level that a lot of these folks just have no idea of the market dynamics that they're attempting to regulate.
Would you be more comfortable? You called them my buddies or my allies earlier in the podcast. I don't know any of these people. Just want to put that on the record.
Just a
But
fanboy.
a fanboy of certain people. There's no question about that. So would you be more comfortable if some of the antitrust advocates were just honest and said that, number one, we're concerned with anti-competitive behavior, and number two, we're concerned with big companies, just like, Joseph Sherman was concerned with big companies 130 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, I would appreciate the honesty, but my pushback consistently is not about the fact that folks are being dishonest. It's that they're actually pushing towards outcomes that make their supposed goals less likely to be accomplished.
Right.
Like that's the
Well,
and Anthony put his finger directly on it. If you are pushing for companies not to be able to develop their products, not to be able to have their defaults, what you are pushing for is less competition, because that's just sort of the reality of the case.
Well, but I think you could also make the argument, and I'll make it right here. I don't know that Apple deserves, or I don't know that it's healthy for the economy for Apple to have business in, Apple Music, Apple Pay, Apple search engine. I don't know that they need all these additional verticals so that they continue to consolidate power.
Apple's selling proposition has been integration the entire time. That's how they got their position in the first place. This is like turning around in Nvidia and saying, yeah, your stock was super low in October 2022 or whatever it was, and you were really suffering because people were like, you spent all this money, you were so focused on being sort of deeply integrated, and now today we're going to punish you for that. Apple's proposition has been integration from the beginning, and I have a real fundamental philosophical problem, and also just the reality is if you want to compete with Google, like, just the reality is something it's going to require an entity like Apple. This startup in a garage idea that's gonna come up and take them down. It's just, that's not realistic given the size and resources necessary in these markets today.
The barriers to entry are significant. Apple has calculated that it would cost $6 billion annually to run a general search engine. And according to the case, in late 2020, Google estimated how much it would cost Apple to create and maintain a general search engine that could compete with Google. And Apple would have to spend something in the rough order of $20 billion. So yes, you're not creating modern day Google in a garage anymore. But perhaps Apple will go that direction in sometime in the near future. I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Well, like I said, I think one solution would be to acquire Perplexity, but the same antitrust enforcers that are making that an attractive option are also saying it's illegal.